We come to Berlin, we American presidents, because it's our duty to speak in this place of freedom. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Today's guest is Dr. Tracey Jones. Dr. Jones is an Air Force Academy graduate and a veteran, and thank you for your service, Dr. Jones. We'll talk a little bit about that later on. Extensive business experience in the business world. Dr. Jones is the daughter of one of my personal role models, Charlie Tremendous Jones. We'll talk about your dad in a minute. Can't get out of here without talking about your dad. And you're the president of Tremendous Leadership. So we're going to talk about that. I've stalked you extensively on the internet, seen videos of you and all of that. You've got a lot of experience to share with our audience, and I'm just thrilled that you're here. Dr. Jones, thank you, and welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast.
Semper Fi, Mike. It's an honor to be here. Thank you to the guests out there listening to as well.
Well, thank you. Well, listen, the intro was okay, but, as you can see, I was just kind of freestyling it and all of that. What more do we need to know up front about Dr. Tracey Jones that you'd like us to know?
Well, I'm from South Central Pennsylvania. Like many people in the military, lived all over the world, got to live in the Middle East and Europe extensively, and then eventually came back home. It's kind of like a little Hallmark movie. I came back home to run the business about 3 months after my father immigrated to heaven. So I did not think that I was going to be in this role. I had always hoped with all the other roles that I was in that my entrepreneurial spark would eventually ignite. And I grew up, Mike, you mentioned my father. He would take me from the time I was a little girl to meetings with primarily entrepreneurs in the financial services and real estate, athletes, churches, Amway, direct sales. So people that worked for a living. And he grew up in the insurance business. Mm-hmm. So I grew up as a little girl tagging along because he was my idol. He was my ideal prototype as a leader. And I am him. I look like him. I act like him. I mean, I'm different, but as far as imprinting, I was daddy's little girl. Okay. And so it just was following him around and seeing what a leader did. And I observed that he was always very humorous and comedic and would have people crying. But then he was also very real and pragmatic, that, life is tough, but you got to get in there and you fight the good fight. Yeah. So I always had this really kind of work fun, life's bittersweet, kind of rolled into this real congruence. And I'm thankful for that because I looked at life as always having this duality. So when I was up, I knew I would eventually be down. When it was rainy, I eventually knew the sun would come out. So as a child, he really helped me build my resilience and my adaptive capacity early on. So I think that's the biggest thing about me. He was wild and crazy. And I like to think after watching that from such a young child, I'd like to think I got some of that wild and craziness too.
Well, I watched one of his videos last night. I found him years ago on YouTube, and it was a collection of older speakers and all of that. And I'm like, who the hell is Charlie Tremendous Jones? And then I started listening to, I was driving, so I didn't see the video. I was listening to YouTube driving, and I'm like, this guy is awesome. So I became a fan. So anyway, we'll talk about him later on. We could do a whole podcast on him, I'm sure. But I wanted to talk a little bit and set the stage up front. You're the president of Tremendous Leadership, obviously a play on your dad's name. Maybe even the business your dad started? Was it his business? Okay, so it was Tremendous Leadership at one point, and now it's still, you continued it then, obviously.
Correct. Yes.
Got it. So tell us.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. So I always set the stage up front on maybe that some of the audience isn't quite sure. What is Tremendous Leadership? Who are the clients? What do you do for them?
Sure. Tremendous Leadership was Executive Books when my father had it, started it in 1967, then became Tremendous Life Books, now Tremendous Leadership. We are the premier provider of leadership and personal development content, be it in publishing, be it in a lot of the public domain books, Message Garcia, As a Man Thinketh, Wit and Wisdom of General Patton. And we're also a wholesaler of books for people that use books to build their companies. So he started the company back in 67. And again, our market is, I would say our age demographic is kind of all over the place, but primarily I would say 50 on up. These are already leaders that have a thirst for knowledge and know that, you know what, maybe I have one retirement, maybe I have two retirements, but in these great seasoning years where I start putting my stars on, I have the greatest capacity to serve and freedom to serve. So we tend to skew a little bit older, and it's 99% entrepreneurial, people that want to, because, you know, if you're just punching a clock or what do they call it, navel gazing, personal development doesn't dawn on you, but these are people that are hungry and they want to make themselves better so they can make the world a better place. So that's really what we're, audios, books, DVD, online courses, publishing, all things tremendous.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, we're going to ask at the end for your contact info on the hunch that maybe someone listens says, that's me, I want to contact her. So we'll do that at the end. So knowing who you are now, if I met you and we weren't doing a podcast, I find you in an elevator, we only got 30 floors to go, and I find out who you are, I'd say, okay, all right, Dr. Jones, what's your philosophy on leadership? And we only have about a minute. So what's your executive summary? What is your short, concise philosophy of leadership?
Sure. Well, leadership is nothing more than self-awareness. And the more you know yourself, the better leader you are. So leadership is lifelong learning. And what drives me, my two-word purpose is unpacking truth. I want to constantly go deep, go unlearn what I need to unlearn, relearn what I need to relearn. And my father had a quote that he's known for. He said that you will be the same person 5 years from now that you are today, except for two things: the people you meet and the books you read. Yeah. So my journey on leadership is to surround myself and connect with as many tremendous people and read and publish as many tremendous books as possible.
Yeah, that's a great philosophy and a great quote. I found that years ago, I found that years ago, and it really resonated with me. And I was relating that quote last night to somebody. I was telling that person I was going to be interviewing you today, and I explained that quote, and she had never heard it before, but she was like, wow, that's pretty profound, and it's the absolute truth. So he nailed it. And I've seen a lot of other people, I think, take your dad's quote and massage it a little bit because it's attributed to a lot of people, but I think he's the burning bush, so to speak, when it comes to that quote. So anyway, great answer. I always have to ask the classic question up front, Tracey, the timeless question: leaders, born or made?
Made. 100% made. You and I, Mike, you and I are proof of that. You know, yeah. I was the furthest thing. If it weren't for the military, I'd tell people I'd be living in a van down by the river. I mean, if it weren't for my PhD, I wouldn't be able to reflect back on, 30 plus years of leading people and be able to go, okay, I'm beginning to get it. I think you are born with certain traits. Mm-hmm. And then I believe that God gives you certain spiritual gifts that are beyond your capabilities, but definitely made.
Yeah.
And speaking of the Bible, look at Moses, look at Paul, look at Peter, look at everybody who are the greats, my spiritual heroes. They were all nothing, unqualified.
Yeah.
But they followed the call and then got qualified. That's what leadership is.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I'm pretty sure you're the first individual I've ever interviewed on this podcast that had a famous father in the space. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. So obviously you have Charlie Tremendous Jones genetics, and you were born with his genetics, but I don't think, I'm putting words in your mouth, let you answer. I don't think you were born with his ability. You had to work. Just because you were his daughter didn't mean you got hit with the Tremendous Jones stick and you could get up there and speak just like him right away. I believe you had to study him, study other things, get a body of knowledge and have at it. Any thoughts on that?
Well, any of you that are out there and have siblings, there were 6 of us. I'm number 5 out of 6. So we're all raised on the same household. Yet do you have siblings, Mike?
I do too.
Okay.
Yes.
So maybe you're alike. There's some, but a lot of times people are unbelievably and radically different. And my mom and I were talking about that, how come, some picked up more of it, some didn't want it. And it's all a choice. Leadership is a choice.
Yeah.
It's all how much you're willing to accept, look yourself in the mirror and evolve. And what my mom said to me is, because you were willing to absorb it.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to, if you don't have the willingness to adapt and transform, then no matter what you hear, there are many great people who have kids that go off the rails. And there are many great kids whose parents were, derelict. I mean, it's really up to the individual and choices.
I agree with that. My sisters are all both very accomplished, but we're different from each other, wildly different. I have 4 children, to include a set of twins, a boy and a girl. And not only are they each different from ech other, none of them are like me. None, and that was hard for me at first. Why? What? Of course he's going to like this. Of course and I realized, wait a minute, you didn't gravitate towards some of the things your mom and dad liked or were good at. And so it was a big life lesson for me. So I agree with that. I would love to talk a little bit more about your siblings at some other point, another podcast and all that. But yes, it's the phenomena. So leading into the question of, I believe I'm big on world class. I was a young Marine. It's in my book, and I heard the term world class. I think it was the 76 Olympics. First time I ever heard the term world class. And coincidentally, Tracey, I saw an article on leadership, and it said there are a few institutions that are known to be world class in leadership development. And they listed the U.S. Marine Corps. And now I perked up and I'm like, whoa, I'm a Marine corporal, and that's, long story made short, that's when I realized I'm in a world-class institution, famous for leadership development. I am seeing that. And if I apply myself, I can get really good at this. The stage is set. And of course, I was surrounded by great leaders, and I was also surrounded by neophytes. Every year, that pipeline brings in new people that know nothing about leadership. And as little as a couple of years later, some of them are NCOs in charge of 12 other people at the age of 19 or 20. The lieutenants are 22. You were a 22 or 23-year-old lieutenant out of the academy.
Right.
And so I say it's a learned skill. I know you'll agree with that. But I also believe that anyone with the desire to put in the reps and the work can not only become a good leader, I think they can become a world-class leader. Don't have to necessarily be in a world-class company. I say you can be a world-class leader if you're in charge of the mailroom or the shipping dock in tremendous leadership. I think it's a relative thing. So I'll shut up and let you talk now. Any thoughts on this?
I love how you said that, and I'm glad that you listened. You were open to observe and you picked up on that world class. And then you looked at yourself and said, that's me. See, so my husband was in the military and he came in kind of the Vietnam era. So that wasn't a good, people maybe weren't thinking world class. The draft was, in full force. And I don't think it really got held up as that. But when I came in, when you went into the military, especially one of the academies, this was it. There was no higher calling. So when I hear people go, oh, the military, that's where people go to avoid jail. And I'm sure that's true. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I'm like, it's the military where you learn a greater love other than yourself. Yes. What greater institution is there out there? So it's funny you said that, but I'm always surprised when people are like, now, of course, now people understand and respect the military. But when I came in, I grew up looking at leaders my whole life and thought, well, why wouldn't I want to go to a military school? Because that's where the greatest leaders reside. And I want birds of a feather flock together. I want to learn from them.
Yeah, I love that. Well, your husband was a Naval Academy graduate, class of 72, I believe. Correct. I enlisted in 74. So you should ask him about this. The Marine Corps that we entered was in very deep trouble post-Vietnam, very deep. We had racial problems, drug problems, crime problems. It was like nothing. I couldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. Certainly not what he was expecting coming out of the academy.
Right.
And so we collectively had to save the Marine Corps. And it was a leadership challenge from top to bottom. So I, again, as a young student of it, I saw what was going on. It was just incredible. By the time I returned from college and was commissioned in 1982, the Marine Corps was unrecognizable in the best of ways,
right,
from what I had seen in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
Unrecognizable. We had turned it around so much by 1983, 85. I was telling stories of the old days, and people said, "Oh, Mike, it was never like that. Come on, who would have, that's unbelievable." And that's when I knew we had done well, So
Yeah, I love that you said that you transformed it, because it really is about individuals. And I know we're talking all things leadership, but I think a lot of times when an atmosphere is toxic or not where it should be, people sit there and they blame the leadership. Leadership is about 20% of it. It's the followers. And that's really what I studied extensively in my PhD. What you hit the nail on the head. It's the individuals. Nations and religions and political parties don't stink. Okay. They're just a placeholder for a group. It's all about the individuals. Yeah. And so that you guys saw in there, because I know when I came into the military, and I went to an Army junior college before I went to the military, I went to New Mexico Military Institute, who got me into the Air Force Academy. I entered in 83, and it had already turned. It was, that 10 years from 72 to 83, it was now world class.
Yes.
So that's fascinating, Mike. You should write a book on that. How that whole culture of the military turned around. I hear the old stories too. When I got in mid-80s, people were like, "Oh, back in the day, people would be doing drugs," but that was 10 years earlier. But I do remember people talking about it. But you're right, that was such a radical transformation.
No, it really was, and I'm sure your husband has or could tell you stories of when he entered the Marine Corps, the fleet, that you believe him because he's not lying to you, but it's unbelievable some of the things that he saw. And we had,
correct.
It was unbelievable. I can't even describe it well, but to your point, we turned it around through leadership. And I love what you're saying, followership. I cover that extensively in my leadership training. First of all, with leaders saying, you cannot be a good leader unless you're very self-aware. It starts, and you have to be a good follower. You have to be able to be a good follower. And then you have to set the stage and demand that your followers meet certain standards of character, integrity. The rest is trainable and all of that. So, yeah, I love it. Well, listen, you have obviously in your military career and extensive business career, and then now with tremendous leadership, you've worked with, observed, coached, mentored a lot of leaders. Let's talk about the very best now, the top 10% slice of the very best. Tracey, are there any characteristics, qualities, traits, habits that you believe you have seen common in most of the very best leaders?
Absolutely. But I want to caveat that by saying there's, in leadership literature, there's something called IFT, which is implicit followership theory. And what that means is each of us, Mike, you hit on it. Each of us is uniquely gifted and coded. C.S. Lewis talks about the secret soul key that each of us has. So we're all very uniquely made. But one of the things is each of us with implicit followership theory, from the time we are about 4 years old, we start forming this ideal prototype of what our ideal leader looks like. And that's why I tell parents of young children, and I'm concerned of what is going on in the world today, all those things going into their head, all those things they're seeing are imprinting on them. Okay. And the more they see it, or the more violence or abandonment as a child, right or wrong, that's what gets imprinted on them as their ideal leader. Okay. And that's why we're looking at this and saying, why is this happening? Well, it happens in the early stages of childhood development. So for me, I'm going to tell you who resonates with me as an ideal leader, because each of us out there is going to look at a certain person and say, man, that's my ideal leader. And Mike, who does it for you may be different than who does it for me, because we all have this in my mind's eye, this is my perfect leader. So for me, what I saw early on was men, primarily men. So I relate very well to men, which is why I've always been in male career fields, because I'm comfortable with men. I think like them. I like working with men. Well dressed. Again, I like the military, sharp, put together, squared away. Integrous. Okay. We will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. Okay. Ethical. Ethical is a huge trigger for me. If you are engaged in nepotism, fraternization, cronyism, I am disgusted. I have no time for it. It's just one of my triggers. So for me, my ideal leader is very integrous, typically unfiltered, which means they're not a corporate crony. They're free to say what needs to be. They're a patent. Okay. With a touch of panache of Reagan, with that like my dad, that whimsical, folksy, oh, you just told me to go to hell and I love you for it. Let's hug, kind of thing. That I love that. But I love people that are very pragmatic. I love people that are very truthful, that call on it and really are fearless, that are prepared to stop what's going wrong and to fall on their sword. I mean, that's so for me. That's where I've seen the most, the greatest leaders. Also calm. I don't react well to leaders that are emotional, tyrants, screamers. But I got to tell you something, Mike. There are tests you can take online. Some people like that kind of a leader. I'm a huge Office fan. Some people like Michael Scott. I'm a buddy. I can't stand that. I mean, I love the show, but I would never be able to work for somebody like that because that's not my ideal leader. So I would say integrity. Do I trust them? I don't have to like them. And results oriented. I don't like talkers. I'm an operations person. I worked on jets. Let's just go out and let's go fight this war. So that's the kind of leader that I am going to respond to.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. All good stuff. And let's do the reverse of that coin. You've been around, so you've seen some ineffective leaders.
Right.
You've seen the other end of that bell curve. Do the ineffective ones seem to have some things in common as well?
Right. They tend to be very passive, very laissez-faire. They sit and wear the title, but they don't really do any of the work. I mean, in leadership, you're really out there putting out fires, pruning the dead, diseased, or dying. That's kind of a trigger. They tolerate a lot of bad stuff, and their fraternization, the nepotism, favoritism. They take the paycheck, but they shouldn't be wearing the rank because they're leaders in name only.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, we come from common backgrounds with the military, and really, I know what your dad taught. And I know trust was a big thing with him, and trust, of course, is a big thing with the military. We were taught that, we have to have trust. What they tell you as a student at the academy, when you become a lieutenant, you're brand new. You have to trust your NCOs. You have to. These are the folks that you're senior to them. They're going to salute you. They're going to call you ma'am. But you have to trust them because they've been in the Air Force since you were a little kid, And so you come out and they respect your rank. They don't necessarily respect you yet, but they respect your rank and they trust that you're going to trust them.
Yes.
So with that backdrop, what is your view? I think you're nodding your head. I think you agree that trust is it was so big to me. I've trademarked the term trust-based leadership. That's my book. You could have character, integrity, and competence, all of that. But if you don't engender trust, mediocre results as an organization at best. So Tracey, what are your thoughts on trust? And you're speaking now to leaders that want to enhance their skills. Recommend somebody comes to you and says, how I want to trust. What are some ways that I can show people that I trust them?
Okay.
Not being laissez-faire, right. But how do I develop trust in my organization?
Okay, to develop trust. Well, first of all, one of my favorite quotes of all time is by George MacDonald, and he says, "To be trusted is a greater compliment than to be loved." Okay. Now think about that.
Yeah.
I know we all want to be loved. I want to be loved. I don't like it when people don't like me, but I don't care if you don't like me. I have to know I have your trust.
Yeah.
Now, crisis leadership is different than peacetime military. I get all that. But one of the things, when you trust somebody, you go from being compliant to committed. When you trust somebody, you go from believing in your boss to being a disciple of your boss, to being an all-in soldier. Okay, because life is a battlefield, and at any given time, you're going to be under attack from something in the outside world, or regulations, or somebody from the inside, sabotage. And so trusting your boss is so important. The most important thing as leaders that you can do is listen to them, set an honest expectation, and give them truthful feedback.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. Because if you trust somebody, or if you want somebody to trust you, Mike, I'm going to tell you something, and it's probably going to hurt your feelings, but feelings evaporate. If I'm not honest with you, I'm going to harm you in the long term. Yeah. So I think for bosses, because I don't care what you're saying to my face, if I know you're not a straight shooter with me, if you don't listen to me and you're not honest with me and set the right expectations, then I'm not going to trust you, because I hear what you're saying, but your backgrounds don't go back into that. So really, for leaders out there, listen to your people. Okay. But because remember, leadership is a shared endeavor. It's not just you. They are your co-leaders, and you're only going to be strong as your followers allow you to be. Your followers are going to set you up for success or failure. So listen to them. Then be very clear in the vision. This isn't everybody gets to pick their job assignment for the day. Okay. Right. You set the vision. And then number two, you track the expectations, and you tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly in a timely manner. And that's how you really engender trust.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I want to maybe press you a little bit on that. Everything you said, I love. Let's talk to the leaders now who are newly promoted, or new to a company, or new to a department, and they've inherited a department that the previous leader trust was not his or her long suit. So they're used to leaders who don't trust. How does that leader go in there and overcome a poisoned environment where they're, frankly, I mean, we both have met leaders, I'm sure, I know I have, where they would flat out say, I don't trust people. I've been stabbed in the back, and I only trust what I see, just negative. And of course, that ripples out. People know that. So what's your advice to a leader that has inherited a department, and the people will, eventually the word gets out that his predecessor did not trust his teammates?
Mm-hmm. I'd like to approach this from two separate things. First of all, you have a choice to ruminate about all the crappy things that have happened to you at the hands of your previous bosses. You can hold on to that. It's just like somebody that got dumped by somebody 10 years ago and will never date again because they broke, stop. That was them. Okay. So you got to own it and say, you know what, this is a different person. Again, it's each person's choice to either be open to this or to go, nope, because the first guy failed me. Guess what? I'm projecting that onto you. But that's neuroticism and rumination. That's incredibly self-defeating. And that's a self-imposed emotion. If you want to do it, you can do it. But I want to talk to you about something you said when you talked about somebody brought in to an underperforming operation. I'm sure it's happened to you. I know it's happened to me. I used to love to do that. Okay, let's go in, let's fight. Let's fix everything that's wrong. And I realized I was fighting against the tide because, Mike, this was allowed to happen before my tenure. What does that say about the culture and the entity? That they were okay with it. So they'll bring you in and want you to fix it. And then when you fix it and you ruffle enough feathers, they'll spit you back out. So I just want to be honest about this. Because remember, those people that hated that untrustworthy leader, what did they do about it? Did any of them step up from within and say, you know what? No, typically they don't. They let somebody else come in and then they try and work against them. So you're always going to find some good people, but be very, very wary when you're brought in, because you got hired by an entity that knew they had a poor leader, or even if they didn't, they should have known they had a poor leader, and they let them stay there. And then rather than cultivate somebody from the inside to come up, they're bringing you in And good luck with that, because you got to be an incredibly savvy leader. I've gone in many times, and just because I was so resilient and I'm scrappy, so I like to fight, but I was really set up for failure in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I learned from it. But I would just be very wary of that. Before you go into anything, get a good sense. You talk a lot about background, get a context. Okay. Was this boss really this bad? Really? Who said that? What happened? Why was it allowed to go on for so long? And then I'd really just get in and find out before you get in there, because you may find out that boss wasn't the main cause of the problem.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say about that.
No, and you just said volumes, and I hope everybody listens to this and puts it on rewind. A lot of wisdom there, Tracey, and I want to add to it, if I may. I've been a fixer throughout my Marine Corps career and corporate America, and I learned, again, the hard way early on, that when somebody brought me in to fix, that the problem they were bringing me in to fix, it did exist, but it never existed in isolation. And there were problems, additional problems laterally.
Yes.
And there were usually additional problems up above.
Yes.
And so I learned to ask the new boss, my new boss, listen, I'll come in. I know what you've been hired. I need your support. And to fix this, at a minimum, I'm going to ruffle some feathers. And I'm going to uncover additional problems. So I don't operate well. You're bringing me in to fix problem A. If I find B and C, and I tell you I can't fix problem A without addressing B and C, but B and C makes you uncomfortable or others, don't bring me in.
Yep.
And so that was my way of saying, you're bringing me in to address some knowns. I'm telling you, there's always unknowns.
Beautiful.
Are you okay with that? And are you going to back me up? So hopefully with what you said and what I said, it will be additive. Do you have any additional comments based upon what I said?
I love what you said. And again, you talked about trust. You're being brought in to fix something. And again, I'm not saying don't do it. That's how I got on my war stories. But just like you said, you make sure the people bringing you in have your back. And I mean, really, and they're going to have remember, there's always the honeymoon period. The first 6 months, you're going to hung the moon because you saved everything, blah, 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 blah. But then you're going to keep doing it because that's what you do. And there's going to come a part where that culture that was already there long before you got there is going to really start to bite back. So you really need to make sure, because again, I would say that the leader at the top, if you knew this was going on or didn't know, why didn't you? And then why didn't you fix it? So you just don't want to be the chogy boy or the scapegoat or whatever. But I say go for it, because, you know, that's what makes the greatest stories. But I love that you talked about that. Really get with your boss and say, do I trust you? And that's so important going in. Yeah,
I love that. And I will say this, maybe my final comment on this. I was a fixer. I was known to be a good one, but I realized early on that I was incapable of fixing things by myself. I needed help below me laterally, but in every case, the person that hired me to come in to be a fixer, I would say a year later said, you know, Mike fixed it, but he leaned on me a lot more in the process than I envisioned. So we actually fixed it, because what he told me after a while was, I can't do it without you. I'm about to do this. This is going to ruffle feathers. I need you to support me on this, or I need you to say this and preempt what I'm about to do or say, and all of that. So as always, 360-degree communication is imperative. I think you dropped a lot of sage advice to these people, because as you know, a good amount of time leaders are brought in and all is not well. Oh, well, if all was well, they wouldn't have brought you in. Yeah. Okay. They would have. They would have promoted the boss's son. You know, it was come on now. You're being brought in because something's not right. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, listen, let's change tack a little bit here. There's right behind you in your background there, you're an author and you've written several books, but one of your books is titled Spark. I'd like to have you tell us about it. So what's it about? Why'd you write it? And give us some main points. Well, Spark was the result of my PhD, my dissertation in followership. So halfway through studying about leadership, and I ended my PhD program early 50s, because I figured, well,
I've done some good things. I've done a lot of bad things. And I'd like to really find out from a grounded leadership literature. I got street smarts. I want the book smarts. Why, according to the experts, did things I do, did they work or not work? So it was a real time of self-reflection, and it was tough, because you go back, you reflect back, and you're like, oh man, but my motives were always right. But, like you said, leadership is learned. So my case study was 2 financial institutions that were going through a merger. And with a merger, even though we're stronger together, somebody always has the big fish and somebody is the little fish getting snapped up. Yeah. So anyways, I interviewed the people. They went through this merger. Everybody was promised a job, which is really unheard of in mergers. But I found that certain of the people just thought this was the worst thing in the world, even though the smaller entity was going to go under if they didn't do it. And they were promised jobs. They still were not only entrenched, but they tried to derail and sabotage the entire thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Even some of the leaders. Okay. But then, and it looks so good on paper, but then when you get to people and the dynamics, people don't like change. And then the other half was like, well, this wasn't a crisis because I studied crisis leadership. Why wouldn't we do this? So some people, evolution and change is so natural. It's like breathing. Other people, they'll fight you tooth and nail. They'll fight you. They'll try and ruin it, or they're sabotage. So Spark is really taking the research in that. And I realized, halfway through my PhD in leadership, Mike, I realized, there is no such thing as leadership. There really isn't. I can't lead you anywhere. All I can do is help you ignite individual motivation. Okay. Because my dad would say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Yeah. But you can put salt in his oats and make him thirsty. So for me as a leader, all I can do is put the enabling resources out there, but it's still up to the organizational horses to engage in good citizenship behavior and show up and be part of the shared vision. So SPARK is an acronym, SPARK, singularity, persistence, advocates, resources, and knowledge. So for leadership, there's a intrinsic motivation. There's a motivation from within. That's the S and the P. Okay. That is my singularity. Mike, what do you want to do? It's your life. What's your most authentic leadership style? What do you want to do? Not what my dad wanted to do. What does Tracey want to do? And P, persistence. Nobody can do, you can't outsource the work. Yeah. So my intrinsic motivation from within, what I bring to the table when I sign my orders and show up for duty is I'm all in. And I will die, but I will not quit. Okay. I will never give up. Yeah. But then there's motivation from without, and that's the advocates, resources, and knowledge. So the advocates are, like you said, your bosses that have your back, that will go in. These are the people that will open doors for you, the ones that saw you as an early young Marine and said, you know what, there's something about him. Okay. Yeah. And they're your mentors. Resources. You can't get it right without the right resources, whether it's a uniform or a website or a book, we need tools to help us fight the war. Okay. Yeah. And I was a logistician too. So I need pieces and parts to keep those jets flying. And lastly, knowledge. I have to constantly be out there figuring out at this level of my life, what do I need to know at this next level? So that's really what Spark is all about. Here's what I bring to the table, but then life is never meant to be done alone. Okay, you said it. It's all about community and mastermind groups. Here's what I need from without, because in life, every problem that we have originates from one of 3 sources. Not knowing who you are, which is why self-awareness is the key. Not knowing what you want. And again, that's tough coming out of the military. What do I want? I don't know. The military told me what I should want. Okay. Yeah. Now you're out of the military, but what does Tracey want? And I really languished. I went into semiconductor. I went into high tech. I went into defense, but what does Tracey really want? Okay. And then, number 3, you know what you want, but you don't have the means to get it. And that's very frustrating. You see it, you can taste it, but you don't have the right connections. You don't have the right capital. You don't have the right knowledge. So you really need to dial in the books. And out of those 5 topics, you're probably going to be dialed in on 3 of them. So we really focus on what are the areas. Is it your network? Is it your education? Is it figuring out what you really want in life? And we help people really dial in. Because once you get that flywheel going, everything builds on each other, just like rank in a military. But you got to start with those foundational questions. And too many people start off at that, well, if I just had the money. If you had the money, what? You don't even know why you get up in the morning and what you want to do.
Yeah.
We have to know money's not going to give you vision. So we really help people unpack it, uncover their preconceived obstacles, and uncover their fears so they can do what they were put on this planet to do.
Yeah, I love it. I've not read the book, but I'll go out and buy it. I love it.
I got you a copy for having me on, so you'll have a copy coming.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, a lot of wisdom there. I resonate. Everything you said resonated with me. Do you use this book in trainings and all of that? Do you with your corporate clients? Yeah.
We do. We do online courses. So we have there's a self-guided module and there's one-on-one. So I already have a lot of the courses and there's always books that go along with it. And then we do the introductory 7-module Spark course, but then we do deep dive, singularity deep dive, resources deep dive, where we have 8 modules where we go deep into the A, R, and K. And we could do them as individuals, we can do them with groups, and there's worksheets, there's readings, there's all kind of recordings, but to really help you unpack.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, listen, I wanted to talk a little bit about, this is going to be near and dear to your heart. Again, because of who your dad was, I would assume your dad was not only your dad, he was a role model and a mentor and a coach and all of that. I was blessed with those as well. I had great parents, great coaches, great mentors in the Marine Corps and all that. So I learned early on, even though I didn't know I was learning it, at some point I realized I really did have great role models and all of that. I find, to your point about how children are raised and all that, a lot of people in corporate America in leadership roles have not had a role model or a mentor, or have sought out a coach. And I say there's 2 facets, Tracey. There's the leadership development that your company provides to you. And unfortunately, as you know, 99% of companies provide zero to their leaders as far as leadership training and development. And then there's the self-learning, the self-development and all of that. How important, let's just assume a company does provide it. There's still, I say, the burden of proof to onus is on the leader to self-develop. Most of his learning is not going to be provided by the company. It's that lifelong learner that you talk about. What advice would you give to the young Tracey that doesn't have Charlie Tremendous Jones as a father, young Mike Etor? I find that a lot of people say, I'll do that later. I'll do it later. I'll do it in my 40s and 50s. And I say, no, do it. I always tell executive coaching clients, if I could have talked to you, or someone like me could have talked to you in your 20s and 30s, you would have needed me far less and under more pleasant circumstances in your 50s and 60s, because by then they're in trouble usually. So anyway, I'll shut up now. What's your views? What do you tell the young person in the 20s? He's busy. She's got new children, a mortgage and all of that. Investing in oneself, finding role models, mentors, and maybe coughing up a little bit of money for self-development. What do you think?
Oh, it's the one thing going back. Now, I was exposed to it. I got it either from the books, so I had it offered to me by virtue of the environment that I was living in.
Yeah.
But then in the military, it's how smart are you? Do you know the rules? Do you know the regulations? When I was in government contracting, very smart. But, leadership is all relationships and self-awareness.
Yeah.
And Jim Rohn has a great quote. He says, what is it? Professional development will make you a living. Personal development will make you a fortune. Something very similar to that.
Yeah.
Because 85% of your success as a leader is going to come from your ability to work with people. And if you don't know yourself, how on earth are you going to understand other people? So I wish I would have spent more time early on, not trying to figure out other people, but I wish I would have spent more of my 20s really unpacking my strengths. You know, you got strengths finders, you got DISC, you got Myers-Briggs, you got stand up, so many of those things. And every day I'll find a new test and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have known, because that part of your personality is already imprinted pretty much from baby on, but you can adapt it. So self-awareness is the most important thing. But then the other thing I wish I would have done, I wish I would have had a mentor in every area of my life. I am the chairman of my own board. I own my life. I wish I would have had, and I could have had, I wish I would have taken the time to put a relationship person that I looked up to, a spiritual mentor, a financial mentor, a professional mentor, just put my advocates closer. And I had people that would stop and pour into me. I knew I had a million people I could call at any given time, but I wish I would have been much more intentional about it.
Yeah.
And the more you do now, it's just like compound interest. My husband retired from financial planning. That $100 you put away a month in your 20s, you will retire as a multimillionaire. It's just personal development's just like that. It's compound interest for your soul. And so the more you do it, and it's going to help you, because you're going to be able to look at other people and go, not my circus, not my monkeys. Or, you know what? I need to own this and I need to step up for this. And there's so much contention and division going on in the world right now. Personal development helps you become a more rational, clear-headed thinker, and it helps you stay much more calm as a leader, which is very important.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. And you mentioned, I want to touch about this, a little bit of ad lib here. You mentioned DISC and Myers-Briggs. You know, I'm coming out of the Marine Corps, barrel-chested freedom fighter, as they say, you know, bayonet in my teeth. And they made me take the DISC test when I got with my company. And I'm like, these friggin' civilians, you get at it, you know? And so I took the DISC, like, how is this 30 questions, 5 minutes, that's all it took. How is this going to tell me? And then the results came back, Tracey. You know what I'm about to say. The results came back and nailed me. To the point where it said, very organized, usually has a calendar and org chart on the office wall. And I looked to my left and both of them were hanging on my office wall. And the results nailed me. I mean, nailed me. And so that was the first thing. I became a believer in the test about what I've learned about myself, but more importantly, I got the DISC results of the people in my department. And amazingly, like, duh, you dummy. I knew people I was a good leader. I had an experienced leader, and I knew everybody was a different person. But that's when I realized that some people in the team had wildly different likes and dislikes and preferences and biases, and that, you know, Susie may desire to get information pushed to her a certain way. You do that to Fred, it's like putting a cheese grater on his face, you know, like, don't do it. Right. And so I want to hear your thoughts on this, because I am an advocate of these. And I tell people, if you really want to find out, these aren't the end all to be all, but they're a great tool that I found too late in my career. Or it wasn't too late, but it was much later than I wish I would have known about them earlier. First thing I ever do with clients, individuals, or teams, I make them take those tests.
I couldn't agree more. What did I say? The 3 problems originate not knowing who you are. There's no way. And here's the deal. I can't read my own label. Okay, we're all a fine bottle of wine. I'm looking at myself outside in and upside down. We can't see ourselves. And that's why mentors are important, because you'll have a mentor look at you and say, you know what, Mike, this is what you're really good at. And typically we can't see it. That's why we all, even you, even me, we all pay to have professional coaches. I can coach other people. You can't coach your own self. We're not meant to be like that. Okay. So I can't tell you enough, know yourself, because you cannot dial in your most authentic leadership self without understanding yourself. And here's the problem. If you don't dial in and become self-aware, one of two things happen. You pretend or you drift.
Yeah.
Pretending is exhausting. So I'm, as a female, oh, I'm scary. I came from the military. I bite rabbit head. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, okay, I have to be kinder, gentler, Tracey. I have to be more relational. I have to be nicer. And I became exhausted because I'm a really good person, but I'm a very intense person. And so I tried to be something that I wasn't. And I had to go, listen, I am who I am. I'm only hiring people that get who I am. And I'm only going to work with clients and authors who get who I am. Otherwise, unequally yoked, we're going to kill each other. So I can't emphasize enough. I find at least one test. And in my coaching and my corporate gigs, I do interactive stuff and I do all kinds of things where I have people do their own tests. They love it. Yeah. Who doesn't like to know more about themselves?
Yes.
Us. So I can't emphasize enough. And here's the last thing I'm going to say. I like you as like, touchy-feely people. They're probably relationship people and not task-oriented people. Okay. They want to take a test. Don't you know who you are? And it's understanding that this is so good because it just really helps you. And the other thing about these tests, everybody that's still like not sold on them, when I got my PhD and I started looking at these tests, they're grounded on decades and decades and decades of leadership. Yeah. You don't just come out with a test. That Standout 2.0, Gallup has been gathering, hundreds of millions of data points. 100 million data points don't lie. Okay. Yeah. And so when I realized, wow, because I'm a numbers girl, I'm not a touchy-feely person. But when I looked at it and said, you know what, these tests are grounded in science, I was all in.
Yeah. 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 Well said. Well said. Well, listen, let's change tack a little bit. We're nearing the end here. So I've had people say, Mike, you've done well. I've read your bio. You really were a senior executive in a $1 billion plus executive, publicly traded company. And so you got there. And I aspire to get there. What would you tell the 20-something or the 30-something Mike Etor? Now that you got there, in hindsight, what did you think that was totally bogus? What should you have paid more attention to? So the young Mike Etor is coming to you now. I'm 28 years old. Tracey, you work with high-powered executives. You were one, you are one, you deal with them. What's the best advice I can give you? What should I focus on? What really isn't important? What's your best 1 minute gouge for me? What advice can you give me? I want to get there.
You want to get there. Okay. So a lot of times we don't know what the there is, and the there comes with seasoning. When you're young, it's all about money. Okay. Mm-hmm. And having wealth is not the same as being rich. Yes. I may not have the most wealth, but I am rich and favored and blessed. Yeah. I mean, there are times where I'm just like, you call this work? And it's got nothing to do with what's coming into my bank account. Yeah. So I would say to people, know who you are. And then number two, make sure there's a really strong value congruence. Make sure, know your convictions, know what's important to you, and follow them. And again, when I was in my 20s, I wanted to be a writer. But guess what? You couldn't make money doing that. So I went on this long, squirrely trail, which was cool because I got to tell you, Mike, my best way of going through life is kind of figuring out as we go along. So it really depends. If you're somebody that's very goal driven, and I know that sounds weird because I'm very intense. I'd like to say I'm more passionate about life. Yeah. I could do anything. I can have a tremendous time watching paint dry because I'm all about the energy that I bring into any task. So wherever I go, I would just say, know who you are, know what your values are, and always be kind to yourself. Give yourself room to recover, and just follow what you really want to do in life and embrace failure. That's it.
Sage advice. Would you agree that ideally a person's character and values are impeccable? A character and integrity, morals, and all that are impeccable, and they should remain static throughout life. But to your point, some of the things that you value in your 20s and 30s are probably going to be laughable in your 40s and 50s. Like that's not important. Oh, what was I thinking? I know. Because as we progress in life and get the punches in the face, I call them, we start really learning what's important in life and what you really want to do. And what I wanted as a 26-year-old, I was an older lieutenant, 26-year-old second lieutenant. By the time I was 36, my values were the same. I was still a good leader, but what I thought was important, a lot of that wasn't important anymore.
Correct.
Or it was less important, some other things, wisdom. And so I would like to get your thoughts, and I would just say this. The advice I give people is every mistake that we can make personally or professionally, every one of them has already been made countless times by millions of people throughout history, including recent history. And all we have to do is study, read, and talk to people, and we can avoid making easily avoidable mistakes. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, another acronym, I love this one, ALIVE, ALIVE, always live in view of the eternal. And whether that's your legacy, whether it's the afterlife, heaven, hell, whatever you believe. Yeah. I would just say everything I do, because, I forget who said the quote, comparison is the thief of joy. I think it's Fitzgerald. But that's one of those things too, because other people are going to go, Mike, don't you want to do this? Tracy, don't you want to sell 50 gazillion books? Right. So I would just say really always live in view of the eternal. Yeah. So really, and then the other thing is I've heard a lot of people say this, and this really works for me, reverse engineer it. What do I want on my tombstone? Yeah. Okay. And then every day, am I doing things that promote that? And if not, don't do them. Don't do them. And you got to do it every day. You got to die to self every day. And you got to orient yourself towards your higher purpose every day, because that's how we are. So.
Yeah, I love it. Well, you're singing my song. If you go to my website, there's the Mike Etor page, and it's all about legacy. And because of my military experience and combat experience, I like to tell people, I've been preparing to die for well over 40 years. And thankfully it didn't happen yet. And I am a little bit vain. I want to have a legacy. And so there's a quote on my business card and on the website from Pericles, ancient philosopher. It says, what is important is not what engraved in stone monuments. It is what is woven in the lives of people. Mm-hmm. And to your eternal comment, my mission is to help leaders develop and maximize their skills during and after my life.
I love it. And
to do it after, I have to do things like this.
Right.
And so I'm dragging you into eternity with me.
I love it. Well, and you know what? We're going to be on the other side having these conversations in heaven, because, I know that what I'm doing here in this planet, God coded me for, and we're going to be living forever. So I tell people, you don't want to be unemployed in heaven, get to work, because what you do here now is what you're going to be. I'm going to be speaking and writing books and traveling the solar system and stuff like that. But Norman Vincent Peale has one of my favorite videos where he says that. He says, until you're prepared to die, you can't live. Right. So make peace with it. I am content whenever that happens. I have no bucket list. I've done it all. I've put where I need to go to who I want, and it is what it is. And so I think until you are, like you said, prepared to, like when the whole COVID thing happened, I'm like, did everyone on the planet just find out that they're mortals? I mean, there's one thing we're sure of on this planet, and that's that we're all going to die. So I think the more okay you are with that, you can really go out and live fearlessly and courageously, be the miracle that people need, earn a bunch of money, leave a great legacy, because otherwise you're so scared, you never really bloom and engage in this mortal coil.
Yeah, I love it. I love your comments. And I'll tell you, I've never shared this before in public. I was not unaffected by my combat service. I was affected. And I'm through it. And every night when my head hits the pillow, I silently say, thank you, God, it was a great day. Even if it was the worst day and it wasn't great, thank you. And here's what I say every morning, Tracy, every single morning. As soon as my eyes open, I say, thank you, God, for letting me sleep. And thank you for letting me wake up. Yes. Because I've learned not to take either for granted. And so I'm alive, I'm breathing. it's all downhill. It's all gravy from
I
that
know.
point forward, you know?
I know. And when you have a heart of thankfulness, it is, because
Yes.
whatever happens, good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. You can
Yeah.
still, but you have to be oriented that there is some greater purpose. There's a reason for it. I may not know now, but someday I will. And that's why we can put our little heads down and always
Yes.
be thankful.
Yeah, I agree. Well, listen, this is, again, you're the first one I've ever had to do this. I want to take a couple minutes because we can't get out of this podcast without me asking you to provide a little bit of a primer on your dad. If you're listening to this podcast, folks, you must, first of all, listen to Tracey, read her books and all of that, but you must search for her dad. I watched one of his YouTube videos last night, and it was a clip of him talking to people. And then he was giving somebody a tour of his home and the various libraries. And he was talking about the ancient classics. This is the military books. I mean, and then he took them in another building that was stuffed full of books and all of that. So a man after my heart. I've got more books than I could ever possibly read, So your dad was, in fact, a famous guy in the leadership and motivational speaking space and all of that. Tell us a little bit about him. Tell us what he did and where can people find him?
Thank you. Well, my father, if you want to see his videos, you can go to YouTube. Tremendous Life Books is where I put all his archival stuff. Also on Tremendous Leadership, the YouTube channel. So there's kind of two places, but if you just Google Charlie Tremendous Jones, there's stuff him all over. But I want to share with you, I'm so glad you asked about his upbringing. My father, and he did not tell me this until the day before he passed. I had the blessing of being with both my mother and father when their souls departed for heaven, which is, it's just a temporary goodbye.
Yeah.
But he was born in the Deep South in 1927 in extreme poverty. And his mother who I think was 14 at the time, had 5 kids in 5 years and left them. So he was abandoned. He was the oldest of 5. And, back then, the Great Depression, 29 to 39, poverty, and in the Deep South without a mom, kind of ne'er-do-well father, lost, and his father was out working. And so my dad would do jobs on the side, to try to earn money for his younger siblings. And he actually flunked out of school in the 8th grade, flunked out. And he was so embarrassed. He followed his father up to Alaska to work on the Alaskan pipeline. So my dad only graduated from the 8th grade.
Wow.
But you can look at the early pictures of him. He just had this resilience. Okay. Yeah. And he had a couple people in his life. He had wonderful people that took care of them physically, that bought them gifts. He had a gentleman across the street that took him to Sunday school and exposed him to the love of God. So my father then met Gloria. There's 3 things that happened to my dad. He met my mother, Gloria. He crashed a Franklin Marshall prom, met my mother, Gloria. They eloped after 14 weeks. Okay. He didn't have any money, but Gloria believed in him and they eloped. So he met Gloria. He met a woman that he said believed in him. Number 2, he found the life insurance business, which was a phenomenal business for, as long as you have that initiative and that people's charisma. And so he built with Mutual New York, by the time he was in his early 30s, now this would have been in the 50s, $100 million business. That was unheard of back then. Such a motivator. And then another podcast, a story, he left the insurance business and then started speaking full time. Yeah. So the other thing that happened when he was, before I came along, he met Christ. He had a gentleman jump in his car and he was trying to sell him a life insurance policy. And this guy just opened the Bible and shared with him that, that God loves him. And my dad created this pamphlet called the Eternal Life Insurance Policy. And he's like, my father is the largest owner of the greatest insurance and it pays dividends right away. And if this plane hits the ground, we're going right back. I mean, he found Gloria, he found a business that the more he put into, the more it put into him, and he found Christ. And so that was pretty much after it. And then after that, it was just talk about hustle. And Mike, he hustled up until, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer at 70, and he lived another 10 years, lost sight in his eye, lost his voice because of the cancer, was a shell of a man, but he went on a world tour, could only whisper. He hustled, he finished the race strong, and he was so anxious to get home. That was one of the most impactful things, watching him face death and knowing that he wasn't perfect. And he only told me about the bad things that happened in his life right before he was going to die. Because he's like, I don't want to be defined by the bad things that might happen in my life. And I was like, this guy's amazing. So that's how you can. And Life is Tremendous came out in 1967. It is still in print. I think it sold about 8 million copies, and it still continues. There's still, at least I just heard from the publisher, there's still 1 million copies out there in print. So get a copy of Life is Tremendous. Yeah,
just a tremendous individual, and I'm not just pandering to you. I was a fan before I ever became aware of you. And I'll be the first to admit I'll steal from the best. And I've adopted some of his mannerisms of speaking when he speaks to crowds. And if I watched him, I'm like, that is really good. And I would have never thought of that myself, but I have picked up techniques from him that I do. Brilliant, unsurpassed as a motivational for you burgeoning speakers out there. I mean, yes, he was the best at it, without a doubt. And like I said, I listened to him. I don't know if I discussed this on the podcast or before when we were talking. I was driving and listening to him. I didn't have the benefit of seeing him on video. I was listening to him on YouTube on my speakers, and I was driving, couldn't see the visual, but just the words. I'm like, I got to look this guy up. The words were, I could tell this was somebody special. So this is why we're discussing him. Audience, please find him. Tracey, tell you where to go. Listen, Tracey, we're done here, but I can't let you out without asking you the fantasy question. If you could bring back one leader from the past, spend a day with that person, who would it be and why? Oh, that's tough. I would have to say, from a spiritual perspective, I'd have to say the Apostle Paul, because he was so radically transformed on the road to Damascus. There was never anybody more transformed or all in with the vision than Paul. Yeah. And I love the way he touted his credibility. Talk about early apologetics, the way he unpacked issues for people, the way he was all things to all people, but really was unwavering in his truth. And I loved his letters to the churches. Oh, you're doing great. Hey, what did I tell you? Wake up. And so he really has this snarky side to him that I just love. So I have to say, Paul. The other person I'd say is Patton. I would love to sit and talk with Patton, because again, an unfiltered leader, just out there, but just so passionate, and to be so tough like Paul. I love the tough leaders that get people to weep and cry and love them. That to me just fascinates me. Yeah. Yes. Well, both great choices. I don't think we've had those choices before. So you have it. I had a lot of Abraham Lincolns, a bunch of Jesus Christ. Well, just great thing. But I don't think we've had Patton. I've studied him quite a bit. He was quite a character, and very demanding of himself. Huge ego, obviously, which is what it takes, I think, to be a battlefield commander at that level. Yes. Really. And here we have. I don't know if you can see this. Yeah, I can. We got the little pen and we got the little Lincoln book. So we got the little book. Yeah. Yes, I have both of those. So great. Well, listen, Tracey, thank you so much. How can people find your books? How can people find you? How can people contact you? Well, tremendousleadership.com has LinkedIn, all our books, all our audios. You can reach out to us. I have a Leaders on Leadership podcast and I'd love to get you on it, Mike, where we talk about what it takes to pay the price of leadership and not just be a leader in name only. So if you go to Tremendous Leadership, I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you there. Very active there. But tremendousleadership.com will get you all things towards the product, YouTube, podcast, you name it, it's all there. And you can email me and it'll come to my global headquarters here in Enola, Pennsylvania. Yes, I think that's how I contacted you, right? I think I went to your website. Oh, Tracey C. Jones. Yeah, or you can come on. That's Tracey C. Jones is my speaker website. Either one is good.
Tracey.
Yeah, I think I went on the contact me and filled it in. I'm like, man, I don't know where this is going. I just hit send, and next thing I know, boom, there you go. You responded. So thank you so much for that. I know you didn't know who the hell is Mike Ito, who's this guy, but thank you for coming. This is a great episode. It's going to be very popular. Selfishly, I would ask that you consider coming back again someday.
Just say when, Mike, and I'd love to have you on mine. You talk about that. When I saw, for the listeners, when I saw him pop up with his credentials, I was like, my husband's a Marine. We were on our way to Israel, and I'm like, Mike, this guy just reached out to me. So please know, I am a big fan of yours too, Mike.
Well, thank you so much. And on that note, thank you again. Thank you so much, Tracey.
You're welcome.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Pericles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.